Welcome aboard HFY Vanguard, a channel where humans break chains, bend empires, and carve their names in the stars. The journey starts here. The Etherian High Council Chamber was a masterpiece of precision and restraint, designed not for comfort, but for the weight of decisions that would ripple across galaxies. 12 silver-skinned beings sat around a circular table, carved from a single piece of crystalline alloy, its surface alive with embedded constellations that shifted faintly as though breathing. Above them, 3 artificial suns floated at equidistant points, each radiating a steady golden-white glow that cast no shadows. The chamber had been engineered to eliminate ambiguity. At the table's center, a holographic projection of Earth rotated slowly, a small blue and green sphere wrapped in thin veils of cloud turning in silence. Around it, strings of Etherian script tracked data points, population growth, curves, energy, output, atmospheric degradation. Numbers danced in soft pulses of light. They have reached quantum communication capabilities, 73 years ahead of our projections. Eldertron's voice carried the weight of centuries, every syllable measured and deliberate. His crystalline eyes reflected the rotating image of Earth, but there was no awe in them, only assessment. Another counselor leaned forward, robes shimmering like liquid mercury. Their weapons technology advances at an alarming rate. Particle-based rail systems, hypersonic platforms, and their population. Ada, the sharpest of the 12, narrowed her gaze until the green holographic numbers sharpened into alarming spikes. 8 billion souls, all-consuming, expanding, destroying their own habitat, yet somehow surviving. The Grand Architect, oldest among them and seated at the apex of the ring, raised a 6-fingered hand. The motion was enough to pull the chamber into silence. His skin was not simply silver, but overlaid with faint bands of age, a rare sight among his kind. We have monitored 177,000 developing species across this galaxy. Of them, only humans have demonstrated such unpredictability. The word unpredictability left his mouth as if it carried an unpleasant taste. Unpredictable, murmured Tron, is dangerous. The Grand Architect let the moment stretch. Then they must be assessed for potential threat, for elimination if necessary. No one in the chamber disagreed. The Etherian record was clear. Civilizations that advanced too quickly without internal stability often became external problems. In thousands of cycles, the Council's protocols had rarely failed. A door materialized from the chamber's seamless wall, appearing with such perfect geometry that one could almost believe it had always been there, waiting for permission to reveal itself. Through it strode a figure whose presence subtly altered the gravity in the room. Reyna Alistar. She moved with lethal grace, the kind that came from countless hours of training rather than genetic accident. Her violet skin glowed faintly under the sun's light, a smooth and luminous tone that contrasted against the precise white of her uniform. Her silver hair fell in immaculate waves, each strand a mirror catching the sun's glow. Emerald eyes shot through with flecks of gold surveyed the room with calculating precision. She stopped at the circle's edge and bowed in a precise 45-degree arc. Operation Specialist Alistar, reporting as summoned. The Grand Architect inclined his head. Specialist Alistar, you understand why you are here. Yes, Architect. I am to infiltrate the human world, identify their weaknesses, determine whether their civilization poses a sufficient threat to warrant planetary neutralization. Her voice was calm, controlled. Counselor Tron gestured toward the projection of Earth. You will be inserted into a population center called New York City. Its density and diversity will provide optimal data. You have 14 Earth days to observe, assess, and report. Counselor Ada's crystalline gaze flicked to Reyna with a faint edge of disdain. Your physical modifications have been approved. In that region, your skin tone will cause minimal alarm. The locals will assume it is a form of what they call body modification. There was a ripple of restrained amusement around the table. Ada continued. Other attributes have been calibrated to ensure cooperation from male specimens. Reyna's expression did not change, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. She was a warrior, not a seduction operative. Still, orders were orders. You will proceed with efficiency, Precision and detachment, the Grand Architect said, his voice cutting through any lingering undercurrents. No extended native contact beyond what is required for mission parameters. Reyna straightened. Understood. I will not fail the council. As she turned to leave, the three sons caught her profile in sharp relief. Strong jaw, unreadable eyes. None of the council noticed the flicker, so slight it might have been imagined in her gaze as she looked back at the slowly spinning earth. In the silence that followed her departure, Ada leaned toward Tron. You think she will succeed? Tron's eyes remained on the projection of earth. She will succeed. The question is what she will find. Reyna walked the long corridor outside the council chamber. Each step perfectly measured, her boots echoing softly against the crystalline floor. Etherian architecture always left her feeling as though she were moving inside a mathematical equation, precise, flawless, without room for error. As the corridor curved away from the chamber, she allowed herself the smallest exhale. She had studied thousands of dossiers, prepared dozens of mission plans, but none for a world quite like this one. Earth. It was strange to think of it so loud, so chaotic, so inefficient. The very inefficiency was one reason the council considered it dangerous. Etherian civilization valued efficiency above all else, every action calculated for maximum outcome, every tradition trimmed of excess until only purpose remained. Humans from the fragments she'd reviewed seemed to waste their time lavishly. Music, dance, festivals, endless personal expression. The thought left her unsettled. A vibration hummed in her palm. She raised her wrist, her personal console blooming into a soft light. Modifications complete. Deployment transport prepared. Coordinates locked for insertion. Proceed, she told the device. Her violet skin would shift slightly under atmospheric filtration. Her neural implant would activate the translation protocols, allowing her to navigate their languages. And her cover story, a research anthropologist studying human behavior, was filed and embedded into the local data nets. None of that concerned her. What concerned her, though, she would never admit it to the council, was something else entirely: unpredictability. Not of the humans, of herself. For 14 days, she would be living in the middle of the very chaos the council distrusted. She was certain she would return unchanged. She had always been certain of herself. And yet, as the transport bay doors opened and she stepped toward the vessel that would carry her to a small blue planet far from the ordered perfection of Etherian Prime, she felt a sensation that was rare for her kind. Anticipation. The descent into Earth's atmosphere was a sequence of vibrations and pressure adjustments so subtle that no human sensor could have detected them. Inside the Etherian transport pod, however, Reyna felt every change as a measured whisper against her augmented nervous system. The pod was shaped like a smooth drop of mercury, its outer hull bending light into invisibility as it slipped through the upper layers of atmosphere. Around her, panels pulsed faintly with mission parameters: insertion zone, cover identity, human language matrix. The familiar data scrolled across her vision, yet her focus kept drifting to the viewport. Earth hung below, no longer the distant hologram from the council chamber, but vast, alive textured. Clouds curled like brushstrokes over deep blue oceans. City lights sparkled faintly along the darkened hemisphere, like constellations spilled across the surface. The pod adjusted trajectory, aiming for a dense concentration of lights on the northeast coast of the largest landmass. New York City. Reyna's jaw tightened slightly. The city's profile matched her mission parameters perfectly. High diversity, constant social interaction, multiple subcultures overlapping in chaotic proximity. An ideal place to observe, a terrible place to remain unnoticed. The pod penetrated the last cloud layer. Below, the city unfolded in an impossible sprawl of light and movement. Even at this altitude, Reyna's enhanced senses could almost taste it: the electric tang of high-voltage grids, the burnt carbon scent of vehicle exhaust, the faint hum of millions of unshielded communication devices. The pod skimmed silently over the Hudson River, its cloaked surface reflecting only moonlight and water. At a predetermined point, it veered toward an unlit section of rooftop between two towering glass structures. It touched down without a sound. The hull liquefied briefly to form an opening, and Reyna stepped out onto the roof. The air hit her like a living wall. Even through her adaptive respiratory filters, she could sense the complexity. Oxygen mingled with particulate dust, hydrocarbon residues, trace elements of 100 unidentifiable aromas. Far below the city roared horns, engines, human voices layered in countless languages. For an instant, she stood still, absorbing it. Etherian cities were silent, clean, precise. The soundscape of New York was alive. Her neural implant flickered. Disguise integrity optimal. Local atmospheric adaptation complete. Language translation active. Reina's uniform had shifted seamlessly into a human approximation of civilian clothing. Black boots, dark trousers, and a tailored jacket over a fitted shirt. Her silver hair remained, but now styled to blend as an extreme but plausible fashion choice. Her violet skin, luminous under Etherian light, had been subtly recalibrated, still striking, but able to pass for high-end cosmetic body modification. She moved to the edge of the roof, her boots silent on the concrete. Below the streets were a river of light. Yellow taxis darted between private cars. Neon signs flared in every color. Blue, pink, orange projected onto glass brick, even thin air via flickering hologram displays. People moved along sidewalks in constant motion, sometimes flowing in orderly streams, sometimes colliding in chaotic knots. Street vendors shouted over the din, selling food that filled the air with unfamiliar scents. Music spilled from doorways and open windows, jazz, bass-heavy, electronic beats, the mournful wail of a saxophone. Reina's auditory receptors adjusted rapidly, filtering key patterns from the noise. Beneath the chaos, there was rhythm, a pulse. She turned from the view, scanning for her landing package. A section of the rooftop shimmered and a compact black case emerged from invisibility. Inside were essentials, a concealed Etherian neural link, encrypted data crystal, and a small set of forged human identification. The documents labeled her as Reina Alistair, anthropologist. The irony was not lost on her. She slung the case over her shoulder and moved toward the rooftop access door. Her orders were clear: embed in a population center, observe, avoid detection. 14 days to complete an assessment that could determine the survival of an entire world. Her boots echoed faintly on the metal stairs as she descended into the building. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and something burnt wires, perhaps. She passed a flickering light fixture, its inconsistent rhythm strangely captivating. On the street, the sensory impact was immediate and overwhelming. From above, the noise had been a single roar. Down here, it was thousands of distinct sounds layered atop one another, fragments of conversation, distant sirens, the thump of bass from a passing car. Her visual field was constantly interrupted, signs flashing, sales digital billboards, playing advertisements, steam rising from subway grates. Her first thought was that the council had been wrong about one thing. The city was not chaotic despite its density. It was chaotic because of it, and somehow that chaos sustained it. She moved among the crowd, her height and posture drawing glances. Most dismissed her with the quick calculation of city dwellers used to unusual sights. Some stared, but their expressions suggested curiosity more than suspicion. Reina kept her stride measured. She scanned her surroundings automatically. Security cameras on building corners, drones passing overhead, vehicles slowing and accelerating in a rhythm she was already memorizing. Her neural implant provided a subtle overlay of data translations, of overheard speech identification of common social behaviors. People brushed past one another, physical contact exchanged without apparent offense. Conversations overlapped in a way that would have been considered disruptive in any Etherian setting, yet here seemed normal. She passed a shop window displaying human clothing, bright fabrics, deliberately distressed designs, garments whose utility was secondary to aesthetic statement. Humans, she realized, broadcast identity not only through language, but through visual markers. Her mission parameters suggested a location for initial observation, a social establishment, one that encouraged voluntary gathering, verbal exchange, and chemical indulgence. A bar. Reina adjusted her course. It took 20 minutes of walking to reach the target, 20 minutes of absorbing fragments of human culture and motion. She passed a busker playing a battered guitar, his voice raw but rich. A woman in a crimson dress laughed with two companions, their arms linked. A food cart sizzled with meat skewers, the scent sharp and enticing. At last, she found herself before an unremarkable storefront on a narrow street. A small sign above the door read Vinyl Records, the letters aged but intact. But her neural implant flagged the detail false front. She pushed open the door. Inside, the air was cooler, the smell of aged paper and vinyl sharp in her senses. Rows of record sleeves stood in quiet order, their covers vibrant with past decades' artwork. And then almost imperceptibly came the shift. At the back of the shop, a narrow hallway curved out of sight. From it came a faint hum of voices, the clink of glass, the distant pulse of jazz. Raina moved toward the sound. The hallway ended in a heavy door. She pushed it open, and the world changed. The bar beyond was dimly lit, its atmosphere a deliberate construction of nostalgia and modern indulgence. Dark wood's soft golden lights, the warm gleam of polished brass fixtures. Neon accents pulsed softly in the corners, casting splashes of color that echoed the city outside, but in controlled measure. At the far end, a long bar of burnished wood stretched beneath shelves lined with bottles, amber green and clear glass catching the light. Behind it moved a man in a white shirt and dark vest, his motions practiced almost balletic as he measured, poured, and stirred. The neon tide her data packet whispered in her thoughts. Her first observation point. She stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. The noise of the city faded. Here the sound was contained low conversations, the clink of ice and glass, the soft, steady rhythm of music that somehow tied it all together. No one paid her more than a glance. A few heads turned briefly, her height, her hair, her posture, but the room's attention was already elsewhere. Her eyes moved to this man behind the bar. His hair was dark, his posture relaxed yet attentive. His hands moved with the same efficiency she had seen in high-ranking Etherian technicians, but his manner carried something else, something looser, unmeasured. He looked up briefly, catching her gaze for a heartbeat. Raina stepped toward the bar. The mission had begun. The neon tide was a paradox hidden in plain sight, wrapped in nostalgia, yet humming with life. The bar was never still. Every object seemed to have a history. The brass footrail beneath the bar was worn smooth by decades of shoes, the leather stools softened by countless customers. Light glowed warm from fixtures shaped like the glassware they illuminated, throwing soft shadows that hinted at mystery. At the center of it all was the man behind the bar. Hank Wintermute moved with quiet precision, though his demeanor didn't carry the crisp severity of a soldier or scientist. Instead, there was something practiced yet casual, like a musician who knew his craft so well he no longer thought about each note. A shaker rattled briefly in his hands, ice and liquid harmonizing in a rhythm so precise it almost sounded deliberate. Raina took in the scene with the kind of analysis bred from years of training. Every detail was noted: the polished bar surface, the carefully curated selection of bottles, the flow of people to and from tables. Her senses extended, noting the subtle chemical traces of citrus, ethanol, sugar bitters. She approached the bar. Hank looked up as she approached, his eyes flicking briefly to her hair. Silver, unusual but not alarming in a city like this. His gaze shifted to her skin, pausing a heartbeat longer on the violet tone that caught the light like a faintly luminescent silk. His brows lifted slightly, but his expression remained professional. "Welcome to the neon tide," he said, voice pitched to be heard without breaking the room's atmosphere. "First time here." Raina inclined her head slightly. "Yes, I require a beverage." Her tone was precise, formal, in a way that didn't quite fit the environment. "That's usually why people come to bars," Hank said with a faint smile. "Any preference? Sweet, sour, strong?" "I am unfamiliar with the options," Raina replied after a pause. "A recommendation would be appropriate based on cultural significance." Something in the way she said it, based on cultural significance, made Hank's smile shift just slightly. He'd heard unusual requests before, but this one had the ring of someone trying very hard to sound casual about something important. "Well," he said, reaching for a bottle, "in that case, let me introduce you to a classic. An old-fashioned with a little modification of my own." Raina watched as he selected each component with care. The bottle of bourbon caught the warm, light amber liquid swirling as he measured it precisely. He added a touch of maple instead of sugar, vanilla-infused bitters, and a twist of lemon. His movements were deliberate yet unhurried, as though each step mattered not just for function, but for form. Her implant quietly noted human ritual, observed preparation of fermented beverages, performance. He set the glass before her, the liquid warm gold in the dim light, a curl of citrus peel releasing faint aromatic oils at the surface. "This is a winter mute old-fashioned," he said. "One of my personal variations. I don't make it for just anyone." Raina's hand froze briefly on the glass. Her cultural protocols flared in the back of her mind. In a theory unaccustomed to create something unique for another being, especially something consumed, was a profound act. A declaration, a life bond. Her gaze flicked briefly to Hank's face, but his expression carried no awareness of the magnitude of what he had just said. Her mission parameters advise maintain cover. Do not engage in cultural declarations. And yet, her fingers closed around the glass. She lifted it to her lips. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Her enhanced taste receptors, designed to detect minute traces of toxins, exploded with input. Sweet, bitter, smoky, sharp citrus oils, the subtle grounding of maple. Flavors layered, interlaced, blooming in sequences she could barely catalog before the next arrived. Her pupils dilated involuntarily. Her body's controlled systems stumbled just for a moment. She's searching for an adequate word, extraordinary. Hank's mouth tilted into a smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is beyond compliment," she said before catching herself. She took another sip, longer this time. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading outward along her limbs. Her implant flagged elevated heart rate, increased dopamine response. She ignored it. "Maybe take it slow if you're not used to drinking," Hank said mildly, though his eyes were clearly entertained. "I require another," Raina said simply, setting the empty glass on the bar. His eyebrows lifted. That was fast. She hesitated, then added, "The building will not collapse from the weight of a beverage." Hank laughed, an unguarded sound that startled her in a way she couldn't quite define. It struck something in her, an echo of sensation she hadn't expected. "It means it's on the house," he said. Raina tilted her head. "The structure is above the house. It means free. A gift." He began to mix the second drink, still smiling faintly. "This particular version isn't something I serve to just anyone. Only special customers." Raina's fingers tightened slightly on the bar. In her culture, that sentence was unmistakable. He had confirmed the bond without even realizing it. "You honor me greatly," she said carefully. "Just doing my job," Hank replied. But to Raina, the words were already written into the protocols of her people. The life bond was not symbolic. It was binding. Her implant logged the event automatically. Life bond ritual triggered. Partner Wintermute Hank. Her mission had just become infinitely more complicated. For Hank, it was just another Thursday night. He'd served countless customers, some memorable, most not. But this one, Raina, was different. It wasn't just her striking appearance, though, that would have been enough to turn heads. It was the way she seemed to experience everything with a focus and intensity he rarely saw in New Yorkers, who tended to glide past life's details in a rush to the next thing. She sipped the second drink more slowly, but each taste seemed to hold her completely still for a moment, as though the entire world narrowed to the glass in her hand. So he said, leaning against the bar, "What brings you to New York?" "I am here to study human culture," she said after the briefest pause. He smiled. "Anthropologist, in a manner of speaking." Her implant quietly flagged cover story, functioning within acceptable parameters. Her gaze swept the bar, taking in the space, the customers, the interactions. She noted the proximity of humans to one another, the ease with which they touched shoulders or leaned close to speak. She cataloged the inefficiency of the space, the noise, the sensory overload, and the fact that the humans not only tolerated it, but seemed to seek it out. "You appear to enjoy this environment," she said to Hank. "It's not just about the drinks," he said. "It's about the atmosphere, the connection. Sometimes people come in here looking for a taste of something they can't quite name." She studied him for the long moment. "And you provide it?" "I try," Hank said, eyes on the glass he was polishing. "Sometimes it's in the drink. Sometimes it's just listening to someone who needs to talk." Her implant logged observation human service roles may include emotional labor as a core function. She took another sip of the drink. Heat and flavor unfolded again, and she realized her neural pathways were shifting. She had been sent to find weaknesses in humans. But this pleasure they created from something as simple as liquid was not weakness. It was something else entirely, something powerful. She left the Neon Tide that night with the taste still lingering in her senses. The life bond sealed by her own cultural traditions pulsed quietly in the background of her awareness. 14 days to assess humanity. And she was already certain of one thing. Nothing about this assignment was going to go as planned. The following day, New York wore a different face. Morning light spilled over the skyline, catching on the glass surfaces of skyscrapers and scattering into the streets below. Raina stood at the corner of a busy intersection, absorbing the transformation. At night, the city had been neon and shadows. In daylight, it was a restless tide of motion, unrelenting and without pause. Her implant tracked traffic flow, cataloged common pedestrian behaviors, and cross-referenced with council archives. Observation human activity density remains high across diurnal cycle. Fatigue not a limiting factor. She'd chosen to walk rather than take the concealed transit routes she had memorized, partly to gather more observational data, partly because Hank had suggested it. Best way to see the city is on foot, he'd said. Besides, you can't really appreciate a place until you've dodged a few cabs and almost been hit by a cyclist. Raina wasn't sure if he was serious, but she had agreed. Now he walked a step ahead of her, navigating the crowd with the fluid ease of someone who had spent years moving through it. He seemed to know instinctively when to slow, when to shift just enough for someone to pass, when to cross a street seconds before the light changed. Raina followed, mimicking his movements precisely. Her posture remained upright, her expression neutral, but internally her sensors were firing at maximum capacity. The city was an overwhelming array of stimuli, car horns layered with street musicians playing saxophones, the scent of food carts mingling with exhaust, the sudden burst of laughter from a group clustered around a phone screen. Hank stopped abruptly in front of a cart. All right, first cultural immersion test. She looked at the small stand. A man behind it worked with quick, efficient motions over a flat metal grill. Thin, round discs sizzled as they browned. The smell was rich, oily, layered with spice. This is a bagel cart, Hank explained. Specifically, this guy makes the best bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches in a 5-block radius. Her implant flagged food item identified animal protein, avian ovum grain product, nutritional value moderate, cultural value high regional specialty. I will consume it, Raina said simply. Hank grinned. That's the spirit. He ordered 2, exchanging a few bills of local currency. They stood off to the side as he handed her the sandwich wrapped in thin paper. She examined it briefly, layers of bread, golden egg, crisp meat, and melted cheese. She took a bite. It was chaos in her mouth. Warm, rich, salty, sharp from the cheese, the textures contrasting in a way her nutrient capsules never did. Her neural pathways lit up again, almost as they had with the cocktail. She searched for the correct human phrase, acceptable. Hank laughed. High praise, I think. They walked on the sandwich, disappearing bite by bite. Raina noticed how eating here was often done in motion, people balancing coffee cups, pastries, or wrapped food as they hurried. Efficiency coexisted with indulgence. Her implant logged observation humans integrate consumption of pleasure foods into daily activities despite time constraints. By late morning, Hank led her to a quieter street. You've seen the corporate towers, the crowded avenues. Now you need to see the other New York. They turned into a narrow side street lined with small shops. A record store spilled jazz from a hidden speaker. A tailor worked at a machine in a front window, the rhythmic thud of the needle, keeping time with the faint hum of conversation in a nearby cafe. Hank pushed open a door painted a faded red. Inside, the space was dim and crowded with mismatched chairs and small tables. A trio played live in the corner, upright bass trumpet, and a drum kit that seemed far too old to still work, but did. This is where you hear the city's heartbeat, Hank said, guiding her to a small table. The sound was unlike anything Raina had studied. It was structured, yet free. The rhythm shifted unexpectedly, the melody bent and reformed. Her implant flagged human music form jazz, structure improvisational, cultural function, emotional expression, group synchronization, audience interaction. She sat watching the musicians. Their bodies moved with the music not in precise choreography, but in a loose, responsive way, each note informed by the others. You are playing together without preset sequence, Raina observed when the set ended. That's jazz, Hank said, leaning back. Everyone listens, everyone reacts. It's about trust and timing. Trust, Raina repeated, considering. Later, as they walked through Washington Square Park, she saw more examples. A group of dancers practicing in open space, their bodies moving in sync to a beat from a portable speaker. A child blowing bubbles that drifted toward a fountain, scattering rainbow fragments in the air. Her implant logged observation human physical activity, not always tied to direct purpose. Possible function, social bonding, stress relief, art. She watched the dancers for a moment longer. Their movements were fluid, efficient, only in the sense of achieving beauty rather than function. "Do you dance?" she asked Hank suddenly. He glanced at her. "Not professionally, but I've been known to embarrass myself at weddings. In my observation, physical contact is frequent in such activities," she noted. "That's kind of the point." She considered that, and it is pleasurable. It can be, Hank said, a hint of amusement in his tone. She looked back at the dancers. Pleasurable physical contact, not linked directly to reproduction. Her implant logged it carefully, but she suspected her interest was no longer strictly academic. They ended the afternoon in another corner of the city, Chinatown. Narrow streets filled with the scent of spices, lanterns strung overhead. Hank guided her into a small restaurant tucked between two shops. "This is where you get dumplings that ruin you for anywhere else," he said as they slid into a booth. Minutes later, bamboo steamers filled with delicate folded shapes arrived. Raina picked one up, carefully examining the thin skin, the way it held the filling. She bit into it and flavor bloomed ginger garlic savory meat. Her implant didn't even bother logging the chemical breakdown this time. "You are exposing me to repeated sensory extremes," she said quietly. Hank smiled faintly. "That's New York. There's always more where that came from." By the time they stepped out into the evening air, the city had shifted again. Lights flared to life along the streets, signs and shop windows glowing. Music and conversation rose, blending into the hum that seemed to live in the air. Raina's sensors were saturated, but her thoughts were strangely clear. 14 days. She had come expecting to catalog weaknesses. Instead, she was beginning to see that humanity's inefficiencies, their diversions, their pleasures were not weaknesses at all. They were something else, something the Etherian had forgotten. And she was only beginning to understand how dangerous that realization might be. The diner sat on a corner lit by a single flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly in the cool night air. It was the kind of place that seemed unchanged by time, chrome trim, dulled by decades, the same laminated menus placed in the same cracked vinyl booths. Inside, the smell of coffee and frying bacon hung in the air, comforting and constant. The low hum of conversation mixed with the clatter of dishes. Hank slid into a booth, the vinyl sighing beneath his weight. Raina followed, sitting across from him with her usual impeccable posture. She seemed almost too precise for the setting, like a polished blade left casually on a messy table. A waitress appeared, setting down two menus. "Coffee?" "Yes," Hank said automatically. "I will also consume this coffee beverage," Raina added with a formal nod. The waitress raised an eyebrow but said nothing, scribbling the order before walking away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Raina's eyes followed the waitress, her expression unreadable, before turning back to Hank. "Hank Wintermute," she said, her voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. "There is a matter of significance I must communicate to you." "That sounds serious," Hank said, leaning back. "It is. According to the sacred traditions of my people, we are now bonded. In your cultural terms, married." Hank blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "When you created a unique beverage specifically for me," Raina continued evenly, "and declared that it was not something you made for just anyone, that I was special, you initiated the primary ritual of life bonding in my culture." Hank stared at her. That's a joke, right? This is some kind of performance art thing." Her expression didn't shift. "I do not engage in humorous deception. This is a formal declaration of our new status." The waitress returned with 2 mugs of coffee, breaking the silence. Hank grabbed his and took a sip, wincing as the heat burned his tongue. "Look, Raina, I think there's been a misunderstanding. In my culture, giving someone a special drink isn't binding. It's just friendly service." "I understand your confusion," she said, lifting her coffee and inhaling the steam cautiously before taking a small sip. Her eyes widened slightly. "Another intensely flavorful beverage. Your planet excels at liquid-based sensory stimulation." Hank set his cup down. "Okay, hold on. You keep talking about your planet. Where exactly are you from?" She hesitated for the first time since he'd met her. "A great distance from here. Your understanding of geography would not encompass it." For simplicity, I am not of Earth origin. Hank laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're telling me you're an alien? Yes, Raina said simply. His mind flickered briefly to his father's old journals, scribbled notes about non-terrestrial contact protocols, paranoid diagrams that had always seemed like the product of an overactive imagination. Let's say hypothetically I believe you, he said carefully. What exactly does this bonding mean for me? In the immediate term, it means I will remain in close proximity to you. I must observe, learn from, and protect my bonded mate. This aligns with my mission parameters. Mission parameters, Hank repeated. You're on some kind of assignment here. She nodded. I was sent by the Etherian High Council to assess your species, to determine whether you pose a sufficient threat to galactic stability to warrant neutralization. Hank froze. Neutralization as in planetary elimination, Raina confirmed calmly. The color drained from Hank's face. So you're here to decide whether Earth gets wiped out? That is the nature of my work. I have conducted 17 such assessments. 15 resulted in recommendation for neutralization. Hank leaned back, staring at her and Earth. My assessment is incomplete. I have 11 Earth days remaining. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. And if you decide we're dangerous, then I will recommend elimination. The council will carry out the order. The coffee in Hank's stomach felt suddenly heavy. That's a hell of a lot of power for one person. Raina's gaze was steady. It is a responsibility I have carried for many cycles. But my methods are thorough. I do not make such recommendations lightly. She took another sip of her coffee, her expression momentarily softening. Your culture is different from many I have assessed. Inefficient, chaotic, yet not without value. That's good, Hank asked. It is. Unusual, she admitted. Their eyes met across the table. The hum of the diner seemed far away. For the first time, Hank sensed that beneath her perfect composure was something else, something that might be shifting in ways even she didn't entirely anticipate. Outside, the city lights blurred in the glass as a car passed. Inside, an alien operative and a human bartender sat across from each other in a corner booth coffee, cooling between them and the fate of an entire planet balanced invisibly on the space between their words. The next several days unfolded like a strange, carefully balanced dance. Raina integrated herself into Hank's life with the seamlessness of someone who had studied infiltration for years, but she did not do it mechanically. Each day brought new data, yes, but also something she hadn't expected: anticipation. Her mornings began in the apartment above the bar where Hank lived. The space was compact, lived in, an arrangement of books, mismatched furniture, and shelves crowded with bottles, jars, and spices that were clearly part of his craft. She would stand by the window at sunrise, watching the city wake. The streets shifted from near silence to a gradual roar as though the city itself drew breath. Hank's mornings were slower. He emerged from his bedroom in a t-shirt, hair rumpled, coffee already on his mind. You know, he said one morning, squinting at her, you don't actually have to be standing guard at 6 a.m. I do not require as much sleep as you, Raina replied. An observation at varying hours provides a more complete assessment. He grunted, poured himself coffee, and muttered something about overachieving alien house guests. Daytime hours brought excursions. Hank insisted on showing her the patterns of life beyond the bar. On the second day, he took her to a farmer's market. Tents and stalls crowded the street, piled high with produce, so vibrant that even her enhanced vision caught subtleties in texture and color. This is inefficient, she observed, scanning the stalls. So much space, so many separate vendors. It's not about efficiency, Hank said, handing her a paper basket of strawberries. It's about choice, about connection between the people who grow food and the people who eat it. She examined the strawberries. They were small, uneven, nothing like the standardized nutrient capsules of her people. She bit into one, and her expression stilled. Sweetness burst across her senses, sharper than she'd anticipated, layered with a faint acidity that made her want another before she'd finished the first. Her implant flagged, observation: inefficient food production increases flavor variance. Positive response detected. Evenings were often spent at the Neon Tide. Hank worked, Raina observed. She took a quiet seat at the end of the bar, her eyes constantly moving. She noted how customers came in with different energies. Some tense shoulders, tight voices, clipped. Others relaxed the moment they crossed the threshold, as though the dim light and soft music loosened something inside them. Hank adapted to each one, shifting tone and rhythm, the way a musician might change key. This place functions as a stabilizing node, Raina remarked one evening when the bar was quiet. "Oh, what now?" Hank said, polishing a glass. "A location where individuals release tension, recalibrate emotional state, and restore functionality for further activity." "You mean they unwind?" "Yes, that." She sipped the drink he'd given her, a mocktail this time rich with citrus and herbs. She had learned to moderate the cocktails not because she feared intoxication, but because she feared the involuntary reactions that seemed to follow each new sensory discovery. Hank noticed her watching more closely each day. She didn't just see, she studied the way she tracked conversations without intruding, how she cataloged human interactions as though piecing together a vast and complicated puzzle. On the fourth day, she sat on a stool while he experimented with a new drink recipe. "Why do you stay here?" she asked suddenly. "In New York, in this place, you could work anywhere. Travel. Your skill is transferable." He shrugged. "The city's messy, but it's my kind of messy. And this bar, it's not just a job. It's a place where people connect, where I connect." She tilted her head slightly. "Connection is inefficient. Maybe, but it's worth it." Her implant quietly noted observation human values often prioritize non-quantifiable outcomes. That night, as Hank closed the bar, Raina stood by the door scanning the quiet street. Her enhanced perception picked up something faint, a brief shimmer on the rooftop across the street, as though light bent slightly around a shape that wasn't there. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing to Hank. The next day, she accompanied him to a small jazz club in Harlem. The space was dim, the stage lit in warm gold. A trio performed music spilling like liquid into the air. Raina listened intently. Jazz was unlike any structured composition she had studied. It shifted and reformed in real time, the musicians exchanging glances, small nods, guiding each other through a constantly changing path. "They are improvising," she said quietly. "That's the beauty of it," Hank replied. "It's about trust, listening, adapting." She considered that. Trust, adaptation. Her own training valued control, prediction, elimination of variables. Here, unpredictability was embraced as part of the design. Her implant logged observation human group activity can function optimally in high variability systems. By the sixth day, Raina had mapped Hank's routines. She knew when he preferred quiet, when he needed noise. She knew which customers made him smile and which ones he endured with the patience of a professional. And Hank, in turn, seemed to be adjusting to her constant presence. "Gotta say," he remarked one afternoon as they walked back from the market, "you've blended in better than I expected." She glanced at him. That was the objective. "Yeah, but most people I know wouldn't peg you as the kind of person who'd hang around a bar for a week straight." "I have adapted," she said after a moment. They walked in silence for a few steps. "Adapted to what?" Hank asked. "To the inefficiencies," she said simply. Hank laughed softly, shaking his head. That night, she returned to the window of Hank's apartment. The city stretched out below, alive and restless. Her implant reported subtle anomalies again. Brief distortions in light, faint electromagnetic signatures out of place. Enforcers. They were here. She closed her eyes briefly. The life bond, unshakable, now pulsed faintly in her mind. Her mission parameters were shifting in ways the council had never accounted for. And she was beginning to suspect that she would not be able to complete this assignment with the detachment she had always prided herself on. The club pulsed with bass, the kind of sound that you didn't just hear but felt in your chest. Hank had brought Raina here partly as a continuation of her cultural immersion, and partly because he thought it would be good for her to see New York at its most uninhibited. The dim lighting, the flashing strobes, the crowd pressed close together. It was almost the opposite of the calculated efficiency she'd been raised in. Raina stood just inside the doorway, her posture perfectly still despite the energy around her. Her eyes scanned the room, catching every detail. "This is chaotic," she said over the music. "That's the point," Hank replied with a grin, guiding her toward the bar. "Sometimes you just let the chaos happen." Her gaze lingered on the dance floor. "There is a great deal of physical proximity." "Yeah," Hank said, "that's dancing." Her head tilted slightly. "I will observe," he laughed. "Suit yourself." They had been there less than an hour when Raina's posture shifted imperceptibly. Hank had learned to read her well enough by now to notice. Her head turned slightly, her eyes narrowing as though listening to something no one else could hear. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze swept the crowd, again lingering at the edges of the room. Two figures stood near the entrance, tall, unnaturally still, despite the press of the crowd. Their proportions were slightly off, as though built from memory rather than experience. Both wore dark suits that looked uncomfortably formal for the venue. Raina's jaw tightened. "They are here," she said quietly. "Who's here?" "Enforcement specialist," she replied, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. "From the council." Hank straightened instinctively. "And that's bad, right? They have determined my mission is compromise. Their orders will be extraction or termination." Termination of who, Hank asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Me, and possibly you." Before he could respond, the two figures began to move through the crowd, not pushing, not weaving, but simply moving, and somehow the crowd shifted around them. Raina stepped in front of Hank, her stance shifting subtly. She no longer looked like someone casually standing in a club. She looked like a weapon. "Stay behind me," she said. The music continued, oblivious. Colored lights flashed across the room as the enforcers closed in. The first one moved faster than Hank could follow. One moment it was 3 meters away, the next it was close enough to reach out a hand. Raina met it mid-motion, her palm striking its wrist with a precision that sent a crackle of blue-white energy through the air. The enforcer staggered back a step, its arms sparking faintly. The other advanced, pulling a sleek weapon from inside its jacket, something that shimmered unnaturally as if reality itself resisted its shape. Raina's own hands lit with a faint glow. The air around her vibrated faintly, the scent of ozone rising. She moved. To Hank it was a blur, violet skin and silver hair catching the strobe lights as she struck, dodged and turned. Every movement was efficient, precise aim not to kill but to disable. The crowd reacted slowly. At first they thought it was some kind of performance. Only when one of the enforcers crashed into a table sending glasses flying did panic ripple outward. People screamed, pushing toward the exits. Hank ducked as the second enforcer fired its weapon. A beam of light cut through the air where his head had been a moment earlier, leaving a smoking scar in the wall. "Go!" Raina shouted over the noise, blocking another strike. "I'm not leaving you." "This is not a negotiation." She snapped, her voice sharp in a way he'd never heard. She struck one enforcer in the chest, sending a pulse of energy through it. It convulsed its form, glitching for an instant before stabilizing. "They are adapting," she muttered. The second enforcer closed in from the side. Raina pivoted, intercepting its weapon arm. The weapon discharged the blast, hitting a lighting rig overhead. Sparks showered down as the rig swung dangerously. Raina grabbed Hank's arm, pulling him toward a side door. "Move!" They burst into a narrow hallway behind the club. The muffled bass of the music was replaced by the pounding of their footsteps. "They will follow." Raina said, her voice steady despite the speed of their retreat. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere less populated. I cannot fight them without endangering civilians." They emerged into an alley. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of asphalt and something faintly metallic. Behind them, the door slammed open. The enforcers stepped into the alley, their silhouettes unnervingly calm. Raina turned to face them, placing herself between Hank and the advancing figures. Her hands lit again, brighter this time. "Run when I tell you," she said, without looking back. "I told you I'm not leaving." Her voice cut through as protest. "This is not about you leaving me. It is about you surviving." Before he could respond, the first enforcer lunged. Raina met it head-on, energy crackling across her arms. The second tried to flank her, but she pivoted, striking its leg with a pulse that sent it stumbling. Hank now, he hesitated for the briefest second before turning and running down the alley. Behind him, the fight continued, a blur of movement, flashes of light, the crackle of energy. He reached the street, looking back just in time to see Raina slam one enforcer into the wall, her body lit like a comet. She broke free, sprinting toward him. "Move!" They ran together, disappearing into the night as the enforcers regained their footing. They didn't stop until they reached Hank's car, parked several blocks away. "They will not stop," Rana said, scanning the street before sliding into the passenger seat. "We need distance, somewhere isolated." Hank started the engine, his hands shaking slightly. "I know a place," he said. "Upstate, my grandmother's farm. Nobody's been there in years." "Good," Rana said, her gaze still scanning the darkness. "We leave immediately." The car pulled away from the curb, the city lights falling behind them. Neither of them noticed the dark shape on the rooftop, crystalline eyes tracking their departure before vanishing into the night. The city lights fell away mile by mile, replaced by stretches of dark highway. The sound of tires against asphalt filled the silence in the car. Raina sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed forward. She hadn't spoken since they left Manhattan. Her posture was calm, but Hank could feel the tension radiating from her like a faint electric charge. "You okay?" he asked at last. "I am undamaged," she said without turning. "That's not what I meant." She glanced at him, then her emerald eyes catching the faint glow of the dashboard. "I am functioning within operational parameters." Hank let out a quiet sigh. She was fine physically. Emotionally, he wasn't so sure. The road wound into the hills, the night thickening around them. By the time they reached the gravel drive leading to his grandmother's farm, the horizon was paling faintly with the first hints of dawn. The farmhouse stood dark and quiet at the top of a gentle rise. Its weathered wood was silvered with age, the porch sagging slightly. It looked exactly as it had the last time Hank had been here, empty but not abandoned. He cut the engine. Silence rushed in. "No neighbors for miles," he said, stepping out. "We should be safe here for a while." Raina followed, scanning the area with a warrior's eye. Her movements were silent, precise, isolated, minimal vantage points, acceptable. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Hank moved through the familiar space, opening curtains to let in the first pale light. Raina stepped into the center of the living room, turning slowly. Her eyes lingered on the mismatched furniture, the framed photographs on the wall, the small details of a life lived here. "This dwelling is different from your urban residence," she observed. "It was my grandmother's," Hank said. "She left it to me when she passed. I haven't had the heart to sell it." "You maintain emotional attachment to an uninhabited structure," Raina noted. "I maintain attachment to the memories it holds," Hank corrected. "Humans do that." Raina considered this. "I am beginning to understand." He set about making the place livable, opening windows, dusting off surfaces, finding old blankets. Raina moved quietly, observing, but not interfering. At last, Hank dropped onto the couch, exhausted. Raina stood by the window, watching the tree line with the same stillness she'd shown in the city. "You don't have to stand watch all night," he said. "I require less rest than you, and enforcers are persistent." He watched her for a moment. In the dim morning light, she looked different, not less dangerous. He doubted she could ever look that, but less untouchable. "You ever take a break?" he asked. She turned her head slightly. "Break. Stop, rest, breathe." Her brow furrowed faintly. "Rest is inefficiency. Inefficiency is not always a bad thing," Hank finished for her. They looked at each other for a long moment. Later, as the sun rose higher, Raina finally stepped away from the window. She crossed to where Hank sat, her movements quieter now. "You assist me," she said. "You're welcome," Hank replied. "That is not what I meant. You assist me, despite knowing my purpose here." He leaned back. "You're not the same person who walked into my bar a week ago." Her gaze held his unwavering. "Perhaps not, but my mission remains." "Yeah," Hank said quietly, "and maybe your conclusion will too." They were silent for a long time. In the kitchen, Hank found an old first aid kit. Raina had a shallow cut along her forehead from the fight, at a faint line that shimmered oddly in the light. "Let me look at that," he said. "The damage is superficial. My cellular regeneration will repair it within hours. Humor me." She hesitated, then allowed him to step closer. His hands were careful as he cleaned the wound, the antiseptic sharp in the air. Her eyes followed his movements, her expression unreadable. "You are assisting me without obligation." "Maybe I don't need an obligation," Hank said. Something shifted in her gaze, something he couldn't name. They ended up back in the living room as afternoon light slanted through the dusty windows. Raina sat across from him, her posture less rigid now. "This bond," she said suddenly. "In my culture, it is not symbolic, it is binding." Hank met her gaze. "And in mine, bonds take time. They're built." "Yours are inefficient," she said softly. "Maybe, but they're real." Silence settled again. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of grass and earth. For the first time since this began, Raina looked almost at ease. The drive to the amusement park was silent, except for the low hum of the engine. Raina sat in the passenger seat, scanning the horizon with the focus of a soldier heading to a battlefield. Hank kept his eyes on the road. You're sure about this place? It has sufficient infrastructure. Metal structures, power sources, complex layout, all favorable for asymmetric engagement. That's a fancy way of saying we can use it to set traps. Yes, she said simply. They crested a hill and Wonderland came into view. The park had been closed for years. Rusted gates stood open, their paint peeling. Faded signs promised thrills, wonders, and memories. But the place was silent except for the wind moving through skeletal rides. The Ferris wheel loomed over everything, its metal frame catching the late afternoon sun. Hank pulled the car into the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. The silence here was deeper than at the farm, a stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. Inside the park, the air smelled faintly of rust and old grease. Paint peeled from booths where prizes still hung, faded and dust-covered. The rides were frozen mid-motion like ghosts waiting for life to return. Raina moved ahead of Hank, scanning the structures. The Ferris wheel is central, visible from all approach vectors. And that's a good thing. It will serve as a decoy, she said. Decoy. Her gaze swept the park, calculating. They will expect me to use the tallest structure as a transmission point. We will make it appear that way while concealing the actual transmitter elsewhere. Hank raised an eyebrow. You have a plan. I have a tactic, she corrected. They set to work. Hank found the control booth for the Ferris wheel, its panels dusty but intact. Raina crouched beside the wiring, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Sparks danced faintly as she reconfigured circuits, feeding power from the park's backup generators into the ride. This will broadcast a high-energy signal, she explained. It will draw their attention. And the real transmission, she pointed toward the carousel. Its structure is conductive. It can serve as an antenna for the true signal once we integrate the override device. Hank glanced at her. You're trusting me with the actual transmitter. You are my bonded mate, she said simply. I trust you. The words landed heavier than he expected. As the sun dipped lower, the park shifted into long shadows. Hank worked at the carousel, connecting his father's override device to the control systems. The old machinery groaned as it powered up the painted horses, twitching faintly on their poles. Raina joined him, her eyes scanning the sky. They will come soon. How many? Unknown. Enough to ensure success. That's comforting, Hank muttered. The first sign came with the sound, a low hum that vibrated in Hank's bones. They are here, Raina said, her voice tightening. Above the park, silver shapes broke through the clouds, sleek crafts that caught the dying light. They hovered in perfect formation before descending. 5 enforcers landed near the Ferris wheel, their movements precise and inhumanly smooth. Behind them came a taller figure in more elaborate armor, its surface marked with shifting symbols. Raina's voice was cold. Commander Champ? The commander's voice carried across the park, amplified without visible effort. Specialist Alistar, your defection is confirmed. Surrender for termination. You should know by now, Commander Raina called back, her voice echoing off the rides. I don't surrender easily. Your tactics are predictable. We anticipated your attempt to transmit. The relay has been disabled. For the first time, Hank saw a flicker of uncertainty in Raina's eyes. They think the Ferris wheel is the relay, Hank murmured. Then we make them keep thinking that, Raina said, her voice steadying. She moved forward, placing herself between the enforcers and the Ferris wheel. Electricity began to crackle faintly around her hands, the air shimmering. The enforcers advanced. The fight began in a blur. Raina moved like lightning, literally. Arcs of electricity leapt from her hands, striking enforcers and making their forms glitch. The Ferris wheel lit up, its metal frame glowing as power surged through it. The enforcers adapted quickly, splitting their formation to flank her. Champ advanced steadily, his armor reflecting the flashes of light. Hank crouched at the carousel, watching the battle from the corner of his eye as he worked. The override device hummed, the horses beginning to spin slowly. He adjusted connections, coaxing more power into the transmitter. An enforcer broke from the fight, heading toward the carousel. Hank froze. It reached him in 3 long strides, crystalline eyes locking onto the device. Human subject. Surrender for processing. Hank's heart pounded. You guys really need better lines. The enforcer reached for the device, then froze its form, locking up. Hank looked up to see Raina standing behind it, one hand glowing as she fed a surge of energy through its systems. Focus on your task, she said, her voice sharp. Hank nodded, swallowing hard. The fight intensified. 2 more enforcers closed in on Raina, their weapons humming with dangerous light. She moved between them, her strikes precise, her form blurring as she redirected their momentum. Champ stepped forward, his armor unfolding slightly to reveal weapons integrated into his arms. Your resistance is futile. Noted, Reyna replied and launched herself at him. The impact cracked the ground beneath them. Energy arced across Champ's armor, but it adapted, absorbing the strikes. He countered with a blow that sent her skidding across the pavement. Hank, she called. The carousel's lights flared as Hank connected the final circuit. The transmitter came online, its energy building. Now, he shouted. Reyna broke from Champ, sprinting to the carousel. She placed both hands on the central column, her energy flooding into the system. The lights blazed, the painted horses spinning faster. Data surged, images, sounds, sensations, all the observations she had collected streaming toward the council. Champ advanced, his voice cutting through the noise. The council will not be swayed by sentiment. They will be swayed by truth, Reyna said, her voice fierce. The carousel's lights reached a blinding peak, then went out. Reyna staggered, her energy spent. Hank caught her before she fell. Above them, the silver crafts hovered silently as though waiting. The park was silent except for the faint crackle of cooling metal. Reyna stood unsteadily, her breath even, but her energy clearly drained. Hank stayed close, half supporting her weight. Across the cracked pavement, the enforcers stood motionless, their attention drawn skyward. The silver crafts that had hovered in quiet formation began to shift. The largest of them descended, its hull gleaming in the dying light. A beam of pale light shot down from its underside, striking the ground in front of the Ferris wheel. From the light stepped a figure Hank recognized from Reyna's descriptions. Tall, silver-skinned, robed in translucent layers that shimmered like water. His eyes held the weight of centuries. The Grand Architect. Specialist Alistar the Architect intoned, his voice resonating with a tone that was neither mechanical nor entirely natural. We have received your transmission. Reyna straightened, her exhaustion hidden by sheer will. And your judgment, Architect? The Architect regarded her for a long moment before shifting his gaze to Hank. This world is unlike the others we have assessed, he said. Its inefficiencies are instructive. Its sensory contributions unique among the cultures we have cataloged. Hank frowned. That mean you're not blowing us up? The Architect's expression didn't change, but his tone softened fractionally. The elimination order is rescinded. Earth will be reclassified as a protected cultural asset. Relief hit Hank so suddenly he almost laughed. Protected like a national park. More than that, the Architect said. His gaze returned to Reyna. This outcome is unprecedented. No specialist has ever returned such a recommendation. Because no specialist has ever connected to their subject world, Reyna said evenly. There was a pause. Perhaps that has been our flaw, the Architect admitted. Behind him, Commander Champ shifted slightly, his armor humming. The Council accepts this deviation. The Architect's eyes flashed faintly. The Council accepts the conclusion. Specialist Alistar's judgment will stand. Reyna's shoulders eased slightly, the tension she had carried for days finally loosening. The Architect turned his gaze back to Hank. Human, your world's uniqueness will draw attention. Some will come out of curiosity, some out of greed. You will need guardians. Hank glanced at Reyna. Guess it's a good thing we've got one. Reyna's lips curved faintly, just enough for Hank to know it was genuine. The Architect raised his six-fingered hand. The enforcers straightened, their crystalline eyes dimming slightly. The engagement here is concluded. Specialist Alistar, you are recalled to report in person. I remain on Earth. Reyna interrupted, her voice calm but unyielding. The Architect's gaze sharpened. You choose to stay among them. I am bonded, Reyna said simply. By the law of my people, I will remain. The Architect studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head. So it will be. The light beam brightened, and the Architect stepped back toward it. Earth is safe for now. The light snapped upward, taking the Architect and the enforcers back into the silver craft. Moments later, the ships rose silently into the sky, vanishing into the clouds. The park was quiet again, though it felt different now, less abandoned, more like a place that had just witnessed something important. Hank let out a long breath. Well, that was intense. Reyna exhaled slowly, the faintest hint of fatigue in her voice. The Council has made its decision. Earth will remain. Hank studied her. And you? Her gaze met his. I stay. That was never in question. For the first time in days, Hank smiled without hesitation. Good. They stood there in the shadow of the Ferris wheel, the smell of rust and ozone lingering in the air. both of them aware that while the danger had passed, everything had changed. The neon tide hadn't changed much. The same flickering sign still buzzed faintly over the door. The same scent of citrus alcohol and polished wood hung in the air. The same low hum of conversation and music filled the space as the regulars filed in just like always. But something was different. Hank stood behind the bar, polishing a glass more for the ritual than the result. His hands were steady, but his thoughts drifted. Across the room, Raina sat at her usual seat, not at the far end like a stranger anymore, but at the center of the bar like someone who belonged. She wore civilian clothes now, soft fabric instead of armor. But her eyes were the same sharp, observant, impossible to ignore. She wasn't hiding anymore. So Hank said as he placed a drink in front of her, "How does it feel to be Earth's official interstellar liaison?" Raina lifted the glass, her expression unreadable for a moment. Bureaucratic, tedious, occasionally amusing. "Sounds about right," he smirked. "They still sending diplomats with superiority complexes." "Yes," she said. "I have developed a method for dealing with them." "Oh." "I offer them a cocktail." She took a sip. "And then correct their misconceptions." Hank laughed. "That's my girl." She didn't correct him. A soft bell rang as the door opened. A pair of off-worlders stepped in, humanoid but unmistakably alien. Their features, subtly angular skin, iridescent. They paused, clearly unsure. Hank waved them over. "Welcome to the Tide. We've got drinks that don't kill your kind." "Probably." They exchanged glances and approached. Raina watched silently for a moment, then turned to Hank. "You are adapting well to being a cultural contact point." He shrugged. "I pour drinks. I talk to people. Doesn't matter if they've got 3 hearts or bad fashion sense." She tilted her head. "You're underselling it." "Yeah," he said, "but you already knew that." Later, after the crowd thinned and the music softened, they sat together near the front window. The city outside shimmered under neon and starlight. "Do you ever miss it?" Hank asked. "Your old life?" Raina considered. "The structure, the predictability, yes." She glanced at him. "But the unpredictability here has merit." He raised an eyebrow. "That's your version of a love confession, isn't it?" "Possibly." He leaned in slightly. "You're not gonna vaporize me if I kiss you, right?" "I have deactivated the reflex." "Cool." Their lips met, no lightning, no fireworks, just warmth. Connection. A decision made. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "The bond is permanent, Hank." "Good," he whispered, "because I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the world went on. Humans still struggled with traffic, bad dates, and broken phones. Aliens still arrived with curiosity and confusion. But here in this bar, on this world that had almost been erased, something impossible had happened. A warrior had found a reason not to fight. A human had changed the mind of a galactic empire. And together they were building something no council could quantify, a future neither of them had been designed for, but one they chose anyway.